Good morning.
Morning.
Yeah, thanks for being patient.
Morning.
Good morning. I had to knock out another quick assignment before I got in and almost lost track of time. So thank you for being patient. And we will begin post haste. So we were in chapter chapter 1, and we had gotten to, yeah, today is Wednesday, gotta remember. And we had gotten to the correlation piece, or just before that. So are there any questions about any of the information that we discussed leading up to that point? And if you don't remember it specifically, I can bring up the slides and we can briefly go through it, and you can tell me if in fact there are any questions that you have about those areas. Here's for sharing. Okay. So we went through, let's see. All right, so we went through all of this: structuralism, functionalism. We talked about the 7 models. And then we started into research. So everybody okay so far? We talked about the 6 steps of the scientific model. Any questions there? All right, what a hypothesis was, statistical significance, and then the 4 main goals of psychology. I believe we were in the area of descriptive research, and we talked about the types and ended with archival research, I believe. So if everyone is in agreement, I believe we were at this point and we were going to start here with correlations, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thanks, Cody. Good morning, by the way. Sorry I didn't get here earlier so we could have our morning chats.
I know. I was kind of worried about you.
Yeah, I'll fix that. I'll try not to let that happen again. All right. So the correlation, the big thing to remember here is that correlation does not equal causation. So I would definitely write that down if you're taking any notes. But again, this is being recorded, so you'll have it anyhow. But again, correlation does not cause, correlation is not causation. And the reason for that is that when we look at correlations, correlations are simply relationships, and not a relationship to 2 variables, but relationships as it relates to the state of the 2 variables. So if I recognize that 2 things seem to change their state at the same time, even though they have nothing to do with each other, then I can say that at least if I look at one, I can make a general assumption that the other is also having a change in state. They don't cause each other, they just simply seem to move together in either the same direction, a different direction, or of course there could be no correlation at all. So the way that we identify correlations is by looking at the state of change, and then from that state of change we determine whether it is a positive, negative, or 0 correlation. So if we have a relationship, and again, a change in state where variable 1, let me put that up there, where variable 1 is having a change in its state, and then variable 2 is also having a similar, doesn't have to be the same, but a change in state. If they're both changing, moving in an upward direction, it is considered a positive correlation. So as long as they're moving and the change is in the same direction, it's a positive correlation. It is the same if they are both moving in a downward direction. So V1 and V2 moving up at the same time or moving in state of change. V3 and V4. Oh, wait a minute, V4. So let me change some of this, otherwise it could get confusing. Okay, so V1 and V2, both moving up at the same time. V3 and V4 both moving down at the same time. So as long as they're moving in the same direction, they are considered to be or to have a positive correlation. Okay, good. All right, so now, for instance, the more that I work out, the more weight I lose. Right, so both of those are saying that something is increasing and they're increasing at the same time. If that is a consistent change with respect to both variables, then it is considered a positive correlation. But it has to be a consistent change. It is not a positive correlation if it's a one-time event, or it only happens every now and then. It has to have a consistent relationship where when one changes, so does the other. Again, it's not causal because neither causes the other to change. They just simply happen to change at the same time. So, for instance, ice cream sales and crime rate. Now, ice cream sales, as far as research, ice cream sales don't cause crime rate increase or decrease, nor does crime rate cause ice cream sales to increase or decrease. However, do you think there's any factors that might be the responsible cause of either of those? What do you think might be something that factors into increased crime rate and increased ice cream sales?
I guess like the number of people is like a big factor in each.
It is. Yeah, it is. So when do we see most people buying ice cream?
When it's hot.
When it's hot, yes. When it's hot. So during the summer, ice cream sales tend to increase. Well, as was stated, if more people leave their homes to buy ice cream, then that makes their homes, their apartments, their townhomes, whatever they are, more susceptible to burglary or entry. That also means that those people that are out there buying ice cream, with a larger number of people, it is more likely for someone to have their cell phone lifted or to sit their cell phone down or their laptops or something like that, or their purses or wallets. So the increase in crime rate, even though it doesn't cause ice cream sales, because of the period, more people are available for crime to happen. So again, it's not causal. One does not cause the other. However, because they both tend to see a rise and fall during the same consistent periods, it's considered a positive correlation. Okay, is that clear? Or do you need another example?
Another example, please.
Okay. All right, so oh, here we go. So the more, oh no, let's do this one. The less I eat, the less pimples I have on my face. So even though eating less does not necessarily cause fewer pimples, but if I notice that anyone consistently who stops eating does not have pimples, and that's a consistent occurrence, then I can say that they're both decreasing at the same time. So I'm decreasing my eating habits, and I'm decreasing the number of pimples that I have on my face. Since they are both decreasing in a consistent fashion over time, then I can still say that it is a positive correlation. Okay? So again, it doesn't necessarily mean that one causes the other. It simply means that as one is becoming less, something else becomes less. And I can equate those two over a consistent period, that they are both decreasing around the same time. It doesn't have to be the same amount. It simply means that when one action happens, we see a similar action in the other variable. Or if they both increase, again, consistently, then if they increase, then I can also see an increase in the other variable. So that's a positive correlation. A negative correlation is when we have an inverse relationship. So when variable 1 is increasing, variable 2 is decreasing. So as long as there's an inverse relationship, and again, over a consistent period, then we can announce that it is a negative correlation. So as one thing happens to one variable, the opposite happens to the other. They're still neither causal. Neither one causes a change in the other. So I can use the previous example. If ice cream sales over the summer increases, but I see a decrease in crime rate over that same consistent period, then I can say it's a negative correlation, because as one variable increases, the other variable decreases. Again, you don't say that it's a negative correlation if it only happens once or twice. It has to be over a consistent period. If it is over a consistent period and there's an inverse relationship, then it is considered a negative correlation. If it is a one-time occurrence, or it happens very seldom, meaning that I'll use the same variables as before, that if V1 recognizes a change, so V1 has a change in any direction, so up or down, but V2, whatever that variable is, it either doesn't change at all, or it only changes once or twice. It is not a consistent change. Oh, I put both V2, sorry. V1. So if V2 is having a change in its state, but V1 either doesn't change at all, or it only changes once or twice. So it isn't a consistent change as it relates to V2. Then it is a zero correlation. There is no recognizable correlation between those two variables. So just to recap, if the variables of interest are moving in the same direction, either up or down at the same time, then it is a positive correlation. If they're moving in inverse relationship, if one is going up and the other is going down, or one is going down, the other is going up, it is a negative correlation. And if it only happens sporadically and it is not consistent, the change between the variables as they relate to each other, then it is a zero correlation. So let's look at one other variable of interest, and that is the strength of the relationship. So the strength of the relationship tells us how much they move with respect to each other. So they don't, as I said before, they don't both have to have the same amount of change. We simply see that they both change. So with the strength relationship can only be within these particular values. It can only go from a +1 to 0, and from 0 to a -1. Now, the only thing this is doing, it shows us the strength. It does not show direction. Well, let me say that differently. It shows strength and direction. So both. So again, if I have a positive correlation, then if these are both going in an upward direction, then I would assume that the strength is between 0 and 1. So let's say it's a 0.98. Well, because it's on the positive side of the measure, then that would indicate that is moving in an upward direction. And 98% of the time, when one moves, so does the other. If it's a 0.50, but on the positive side of the spectrum, then it means that as one variable moves, the other only moves 50% of the time. Right? So they still have a consistent movement, but our strength defines how much of a movement one variable has in relation to the other. If they are both in a downward direction, then I could have the same strength, but it would be a -0.98, meaning that the strength is still 98% of the time as one moves, so does the other. But because it's negative, it identifies that they're moving in a downward direction. So negative does not mean plus or minus. Negative simply means direction. Negative means direction downward. Positive means direction upward. And the reason that I try to segregate that from being positive or negative as a change factor or direction is because if it's an inverse relationship, if I'm interested in how much V1 moves in relation to V2, right, I have both directions. I've got up and down. So looking at one of the variables, I can then assess how much the other moves with regard to the variable of interest. So if I'm interested in V1, then, and I have a 0.98 strength factor, then I would say that 98% of the time when V1 changes, V2 also changes. Notice I can establish my direction by the one of interest. So if it's a positive 0.98, I look for the variable of interest because I'm interested in how much it moves with regard to the other variable. So 98% of the time, V1 moves when V2 moves. Since it's positive, I know that I'm looking at the variable that's going in an upward direction. If it were negative 0.98, then I know I'm interested in the variable that's moving in a downward direction. Okay, so that's how the strength applies. And of course, if the value is 0, it means that there is no relationship where one changes as the other changes. One could change on its own and the other not move at all. Or again, it could happen only maybe once or twice. It is not a consistent relationship. That's how we look at positive, negative, and 0 correlations. Okay, any questions before we move on?
Can you leave that up for just a second, please?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And I just wrote a few other things, Cody, that you can capture just so you can segregate which is which. And I'm going to put that a 0 correlation when V1 has a change. V2 does nothing. Stays flat. All right. So that's how we look at correlations and the relationship, not the cause. Remember, one variable does not cause another variable to change. They simply, if we measure them, it just seems that they both seem to change within the same period, and it changes consistently over time when we look at the measure of change. All right, so a couple of examples, and these, as it says, are illusory because there's no real way of knowing, again, causal, but when we look at the relationships, when someone gets something borrowed, something blue, something old, something new, whatever that is, then there's the assumption that that equals a longer marriage, that they will stay together longer. Spilling salt or throwing salt over your shoulder. It was assumed that the bad spirits were on the left side of the body. That was the, if you remember the little cartoon characters, the devil would be on the left shoulder and the angel would be on the right. Well, supposedly because the salt, as it says there, salt was a precious commodity. So if you were willing to give something so great as salt by offering it to the bad spirits, they would leave you alone and you stop having bad luck and all of that. Again, no real support that that really worked, but that was an assumed correlation that there was a relationship between throwing salt and having bad luck. All right. So that's the correlation, simply a relationship. If we're looking for what causes variables to change in relation to each other, then we do experimental research. So correlation is not causation. Experiments do show cause. So it's a scientific procedure, and we're going to manipulate one thing so that we can measure how often it causes the same outcome within the experiment. So again, manipulation and control of variables to determine cause and effect. So what causes it, and then what's the outcome or what is the result of that experiment or that condition. Some of the things that we use to do that are independent variables and dependent variables, experimental groups versus control groups, random assignment, and confounding variables. And we'll go through each of those. So I'm going to use this example, and it will apply to all of those terms. So if I decide that I want to create a drug, and that drug is a drug to eliminate migraine headaches. Well, let's just do headaches. So I'm going to create a drug that will eliminate headaches. Well, the independent variable, or the definition of an independent variable, is the independent variable, IV, is the cause for change in another variable. And it is a variable of interest. So we identify which variable it is that we are interested in measuring or following. And it is the cause for change. So the independent variable, it's whatever we introduce into the equation to cause the change in the second variable, the second or multiple variables. So we can have multiple variables. Generally, we will only have one independent variable. We can have more because we can be doing multiple tests but ideally we will have one particular variable that will cause the change in another variable of interest. The dependent variable the DV is the variable that is susceptible to change, right? Because just because we're doing the experiment, it doesn't necessarily mean that the experiment is going to cause a change in the variable of interest. So we are looking to see if there's an increase, decrease, or no change at all. So that's the reason for the experiment. We want to know, does the independent variable cause a change in the secondary variable? And does it cause an increase, decrease, or no change at all? So for my drug that I want to use to eliminate headaches, I want to administer that drug to a group of people who volunteer to be a part of the experiment. And then I want to test to see if by them taking that drug, does it eliminate headaches? If it does, at least I can do the clinical trial. And if it does, then I can identify that, yes, I at least have some evidence that it works. If it increases the headache, then I'm getting an adverse effect. And if there's no change, then I can surmise that maybe the drug doesn't work at all. Okay. All right. So I'm going to jump down to confounding variables before I talk about the experimental group and control group. So if I have all of you, and all of you have volunteered to be a part of my experiment, and it's a drug to eliminate headaches, what else? What could cause a problem with my experiment?
Side effects, I guess.
I'm sorry?
You were asking like what problems would happen if you're doing this experiment?
Yeah, what other problems, what other things might exist or could cause the results not to be what I would like for them to be?
Side effects.
People
Okay.
use
But side effects, side effects I can control for, because since I created the drug,
Okay, yeah.
I know what those might be.
What
But
about-
you're on the right path.
Okay.
What else?
if people are using different versions of the drug.
Okay, so if they're using other drugs, right? So you're right. So if they're using other drugs that I'm not aware of, then I may see a positive response, but it could be because of the other drugs and not because of mine. I could also decrease headaches by changing, not knowing it, but maybe they came in instead of fluorescent lights, they put in green, the eco lights that don't promote headaches. So there are other things that could be outside of my experiment, the conditions of my experiment, that could fluctuate or cause a change in my results. So those are called confounding variables. And if you want to change the name, it's just whatever will confuse the outcome of my experiment. And so that's why it says to control the confounding variables. Find out as much information as you can so that you can at least be aware of the other values or other conditions that can cause the change in the result of the experiment. So looking at that, now going back to the experimental and control groups, well, if I give all of you the drug and there are those confounding variables, then I don't necessarily know whether the drug worked in some, any, or none, because I don't have any way of controlling if the drug really matters or if it doesn't matter at all. Some of you may have a technique doing yoga, meditation, or something that causes you to be able to minimize your headaches, controlling your breathing, something like that, without the drug. So if I don't know that, then there's no way to compare the existence of the drug and the non-existence of the drug. So that's why I use an experimental group and I use a control group. So the experimental group, as the name would promote, is going to be a part of the experiment in which they will receive the treatment. So for this example, the treatment would be the drug. So the experimental group, so I would divide you guys probably 50-50. 50% of you would be given the drug with the medication in it. The other 50% would be given the pill, but with no medication. So if there is no medication or no treatment, then it is considered a placebo. A placebo is a non-treatment entity that is administered within an experiment. So the experimental group then would have the medication. The non-experimental group or the control group would not have the medication. So I would give everybody their pill, and then maybe an hour later, I would simply ask the question, how many of you lost your headache or it diminished significantly? Well, if I see that more people in the control group diminish their headache than the people in the experimental group, then I may reasonably surmise that the drug doesn't work, because more people who didn't get the drug, got the placebo, lost their headache than the people who did take the drug. But if the experimental group, I have more people in that group that said that it did diminish their headache, then at least with the first trial, I can assume that the drug's effect is positive. It worked at eliminating headaches, right? And that's why I use an experimental group and a control group. Control group gets the placebo, experimental group gets the treatment. Okay? All right. So now let's talk a little. Yes, Cody, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I had put in the chat, would
Oh,
the,
sorry.
The confounding variables, would that include like genetics or no? It's just like physical, environmental situation.
No. Genetics could also be included. And so in order to control that confounding variable, what I would probably do is put a questionnaire survey at the beginning of the experiment, and those who are going to participate, I would ask them to disclose if they have any particular issues that might contradict or conflict with the drug.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So genetics, environment, all of that can be considered a confounding variable because it could change the outcome of the experiment. Yeah. And Cynthia wrote, if people know, okay, if they're taking the actual drug or not. Yeah, and that's why the placebo, we give the placebo so people don't know if they're taking the actual drug or not. So that sort of eliminates the bias, because let's say that, you know, you want me to be successful with my experiment. Then some of you, if you believe that, you know, just giving a positive response will help, you know, so I can be rich, then even if it doesn't work, you may say that it does. So by using a placebo and the treatment, I can minimize that possibility. It doesn't eliminate it, but it can minimize it. So when we talk about bias, there is researcher bias, meaning I definitely want the pill to work. So I may only select people that I think it's going to work on. But then there's participant bias, because again, you may want it to be successful. You may be just happy that you're part of the experiment. And so you get positive results, even though you don't really have positive responses or positive results. So part of that is also eliminating it. One of the other ways that we can do that, which is the other point that was on the slide, is random assignment. I can eliminate bias by not just picking and choosing the people that I want to be a part of the experiment. If I randomly assign people, then everyone, no matter what their conditions are, have the same probability of being selected to participate in the experiment. Now, I would probably only use random assignment if I wanted the treatment to be effective for a general population. So I want it to be for everybody. So random assignment means I'm choosing people at random so that I get a better representation of the general population. However, if I know specifically who I want to participate in it, then I probably wouldn't use, I could still use random assignment, but I may be more selective in that. So if I change this to a drug to eliminate migraine headaches, then I know that my population or my sample population should consist only of people who get migraines. Now, I can still bring in 50 people who admit or have evidence that they have migraine headaches, and then I can still do a random assignment and choose just from that group. But it's not a true assignment because, again, I have eliminated people who don't have migraines. So where I do use random assignment, that is called a true experiment. And if I don't use random assignment, then it is called a quasi experiment, Q-U-A-S-I. It's called a quasi experiment. Okay. So some of the other things, and since we've talked about them, I will simply share them on the screen. All right, so we talked about independent, dependent variable, experimental group versus control group, random assignment, and controlling confounding variables. So let's look at this. All right, so and please put it in the chat box. A therapist wants to test a new drug designed to increase the ability of teenagers with ADHD to take accurate notes in class. What is the independent variable and what is the dependent variable in that particular statement? What is the IV and what is the DV? Okay. Yes, Stephanie, but what is the IV? Sophia, what is the independent variable? What is the dependent variable? Okay, so somebody's not paying attention because we're talking about statement number 2. Okay. All right, so if you haven't answered, then that means you aren't participating. So that will affect the attendance grade. As I said, when I ask a question, it's a way for me also to test to see who's paying attention to the class. All right, so the independent variable is the drug, as many of you have identified. The dependent variable is not the teenager. The dependent variable is the ability to take notes. Remember that the independent variable is what causes the change in the secondary variable. So I'm not looking to change the teenagers. I'm looking to see if there's a change in this particular instance, an increase in the ability to take accurate notes. That's the difference. All right, so that's how you distinguish an independent variable from a dependent variable. Okay, and guys, thanks for writing in there, but I think some of these are catch-up answers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to time the next time I ask a question. I'm going to only give you about 3 seconds or 4 seconds to put in your answer. If your answer is not within that period, then I'm going to assume that your answer was a catch-up answer because you saw people putting a lot of stuff in there instead of being available for the question when it was asked. Okay. All right, so a couple of other things. Single blind and double blind studies. So if I'm doing an experiment, and in that experiment, the researcher, make this the researcher knows which of the volunteers is getting the treatment. So I know who is in the control group. I know who is in the treatment group. or the experimental group, control group, experimental group, experimental group. So if the researcher does know who is in that group, but the people who are in the groups don't know who's getting the treatment or the placebo, then it is considered a single blind study, because only one side, there are two sides, right? The researcher side, side one, the experimental group or the participant side two. So only a single part of the experiment knows or who is getting what, and the other side is blind. So that would be considered a single blind study. If, however, the researcher nor the participants know who's getting what drug, then it is a double blind study, because now both those in group one and in group two don't know who's getting what. In some instances, I want to use a double blind study because I don't want there to be any additional bias. I want it to be a true experiment where the results are more valid, and they become more valid if I don't have any manipulation of the treatment. So
Sarah,
yes, go ahead.
sorry, can you give an example of a single blind experiment?
Yes. Let's say that hair growth chemicals, right? Hair growth chemicals currently react differently to testosterone than estrogen. So in a single blind, I would probably use males and females, but I also want to know, who's getting what, so that I can look at the results from the male perspective, look at the results from the female perspective, and know specifically who's getting which drug and who isn't getting it. So in that instance, it's so defined, the population is so defined that it's okay that I know who's getting what, because I can't manipulate anything. They're male, female, no matter what I do. If it's to a general population, right, then I don't know who is going to have a different response than someone else. So in a I'm sorry, Cody, did that help for the single blind?
So I just want to make sure I have this correct. So the
Yep.
researcher doesn't know, right?
No, the researcher does.
Okay, so it's just the participants that don't know would be the single blind.
That's correct.
Okay, all right, I got it. Yes, that helped. Thank you.
Okay. In a double blind, I could do something like this. Well, let's get rid of this other stuff. So I could create a box. And then from that box, I put in, let's see, for the number of students that we have in the class, I can create this box. And I'm going to put the number of vials, if you will. So I'm going to create a group of vials, and I'm going to make those part of the experiment. So I'm going to put, let's say, 33 of these in here. What I could do on the bottom is put some barcode, and actually let's make it a barcode. So I could put some barcode at the bottom of each vial so that no human, the researcher, doesn't know who's getting what. But I do know what I will identify, that this barcode equals treatment. The other barcode does not equal treatment. And I'll put something in there. So again, I can't read it with the human eye. And this would say placebo. So now I would have, since I've got 30, let's make it 32 people. I'd give 16 people, well, before I do that. So I would take the pill and the pill that has the treatment in it, I would simply put in 16 vials. Now, again, as a barcode, I don't know. All I know is that 16 bottles are getting the drug. And then I would take the other 16 bottles and I would put in the placebo. Now, so again, 16 bottles, 16 bottles. So I've got 16 with the placebo and 16 with the treatment. Well, now because they're all barcoded, I shake them up. I mix them up. And since I'm mixing them up, now I don't know visually which vial has placebo and which vial has treatment. So I administer, give 32 people, they just come up and just grab a vial. And when they come back, I can then say that participant 1 has barcode X, which means that participant 1 got the treatment. And I look at the results from participant 1 to see if there was an increase, a decrease, or no change as a result of the drug. Participant 2 could bring his or her vial. And again, I don't know who got the treatment or not, but I look at their barcode at the bottom of theirs, and that barcode says placebo. I can look at the same thing. Did the placebo cause a response based on what I was looking for from the drug? So again, in that instance, since neither the researcher nor the participants know who got the drug or the placebo, it's considered a double-blind study. Okay, any questions? Okay.
Can you repeat that again? So for double blind, the researchers or the participants know?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep, and that's why once I put the treatment and the placebo in the vials, once I mix all of those up, you just go in and you reach in and you pull out a vial. Well, the only thing that really identifies whether there's a placebo or a treatment is the barcode. And of course, barcodes can't be read by the human eye. So that way, nobody knows who's getting what. I only know that there's 16 that do have treatment, 16 have placebos. But who got it? No way of knowing. So the researcher nor the participants know, and that's a double blind.
May I ask what would be the purpose of that? Like why would they want to do a double blind study?
It primarily, it eliminates bias because usually the researcher is vested in the experiment. And of course, ideally, they want to get the outcome that they're looking for. So if you eliminate the possibility that they could manipulate who's getting what, it increases the validity of the study.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Oh, I just thought about it. Thanks, Cody. I just thought about it. You guys may have seen every now and then that they do the Pepsi Coca-Cola challenge, where they put them both up there, but they cover them up without the name. Well, if the researcher, wanted, if he or she knew who was getting what, then they could sort of lead a person to tasting the one that gives the first impression. As you know, psychologically, our first impressions can tend to be the most powerful. So if I've got a Pepsi and a Coca-Cola, and I, as the researcher, I know which one is which, I may lead people to tasting that one first because that'll be their first impression. And if the second one doesn't override it, then they're going to choose that one. So again, a double blind, with the researcher not knowing, they don't lead people to one or the other. And then, of course, people don't know which one they're tasting, so that as a result, they can simply say, I liked number 1 or number 2. Right. So it's, again, it eliminates bias and also eliminates manipulation by the researcher. So that's single blind and double blind. We talked about placebo, sample bias. Again, when the research participants, when I reach out and say, you know what, you first 5. Well, if those 5 aren't really representative of a larger population, then that introduces bias into the experiment because not everyone is getting an equal chance to participate. And my data won't represent the larger population. We talked random assignment and participant bias. Okay, so let's move on. Now, simply, this is just some tips, guys. That's all it is. And I think in the next classes, I'll move this to the front. But familiarization, you know, like with mathematics, it's easy when someone is presenting it. But if you don't familiarize yourself with the concept and the application, then later on during the exam or even during your assignments, it becomes difficult then to apply the concepts. The more you familiarize yourself by watching the video, reading the books, it's going to help. Active reading. So reading is a habit as with anything else. And the more you read for comprehension, the more likely it is you will get understanding with the information that you're reading. Highlighting. I know at one point they thought highlighting segregated data and made it stick more in memory, but it doesn't. Really the only thing, well, one of the only things that increases your memory capacity is repetition. Doing it over and over. The highlight makes it special, so it only indicates to you that it's something of interest, but it does not increase memory. And also, if you overlearn, right? So overlearn, in my perspective or opinion, is simply that if you've learned it well enough, not just as a student, but that if you were to try to teach someone else, that you know it so well that you could teach it. And if you can teach it, then you can be pretty sure that you know it. If, however, you're trying to explain it to someone and you're having difficulty, then obviously you need some more work in that area. And last but not least, eliminate stress and anxiety. So if you set up a study schedule, if you set up times that you can minimize the number of distractions, then it will probably increase the likelihood that you will retain the information and it becomes knowledge and not just information. Now, again, as I said at the beginning of the class, not this one, but the first class, if you create stress and anxiety by trying to cram for an exam or cram information, the processing centers of the brain shut down, and subsequently you end up not really learning anything. You look at it, but you don't retain it. That's the end of chapter 1. So any questions before we move on into chapter 2?
No.
Okay. All right. So quick question. Did I show you guys the TED Talk about how
No,
our brains, I'm sorry?
no, you didn't.
No, sir.
Okay, good. And before we go into chapter 2, I'm going to show that video. And it's how our brains tend to see things. And so there's a lot of value in understanding how to structure your brain for certain events. And it's also of value to understand how you can also be manipulated, and not because you are less intelligent. It's simply because our brains are created to do subjective or objective things. Let's see. And I think is Yep. Okay, here it is. All right, so we'll share that with you guys. Turn on the sound, and here we are. All right, so this is The Art of Misdirection by Apollo Robbins.
Do you think it's possible to control someone's attention? Even more than that, what about predicting human behavior? I think those are interesting ideas if you could. I mean, for me, that'd be the perfect superpower. Actually, kind of an evil way of approaching it. But for myself, in the past, I've spent the last 20 years studying human behavior from a rather unorthodox way, picking pockets. When we think of misdirection, we think of something as looking off to the side when actually it's often the things that are right in front of us that are hardest things to see, the things that you look at every day that you're blinded to. For example, how many of you still have your cell phones on you right now? Great. Double check, make sure you still have them on you. I was doing some shopping beforehand. Now, you've looked at them probably a few times today, but I'm going to ask you a question about them. Without looking at your cell phone directly yet, can you remember the icon in the bottom right corner? Bring them out, check, and see how accurate you were. How'd you do? Show of hands, did we get it? Now that you're done looking at those, close them down, because every phone has something in common. No matter how you organize the icons, you still have a clock on the front. So without looking at your phone, what time was it? You just looked at your clock, right? It's an interesting idea. Now I'll ask you to take that a step further with a game of trust. Close your eyes. I realize I'm asking you to do that while you just heard there's a pickpocket in the room, but close your eyes. Now, you've been watching me for about 30 seconds. With your eyes closed, what am I wearing? Make your best guess. What color is my shirt? What color is my tie? Now open your eyes. By show of hands, were you right? It's interesting, isn't it? Some of us are a little bit more perceptive than others. It seems that way. But I have a different theory about that model of attention. They have fancy models of attention, Posner's trendy model of attention. For me, I like to think of it very simple, like a surveillance system. It's kind of like you have all these fancy sensories, and inside your brain is a little security guard. For me, I like to call him Frank. So Frank is sitting at a desk. He's got all sorts of cool information in front of him, high-tech equipment. He's got cameras. He's got a little phone that he can pick up, listen to the ears, all these senses, all these perceptions. But attention is what steers your perceptions, is what controls your reality. It's the gateway to the mind. If you don't attend to something, you can't be aware of it. But ironically, you can attend to something without being aware of it. That's why there's the cocktail effect. When you're in a party, you're having conversations with someone, and yet you can recognize your name and you didn't even realize you were listening to that. Now, for my job, I have to play with techniques to exploit this, to play with your attention as a limited resource. So if I could control how you spend your attention, if I could maybe steal your attention through a distraction. Now, instead of doing it like misdirection and throwing off to the side, instead, what I choose to focus on is Frank, to be able to play with the Frank inside your head, your little security guard, and get you, instead of focusing on your external senses, just to go internal for a second. So if I ask you to access a memory, like, what is that? What just happened? Do you have a wallet? Do you have an American Express in your wallet? And when I do that, your Frank turns around. He accesses the file. He has to rewind the tape. And what's interesting is he can't rewind the tape at the same time that he's trying to process new data. Now, I mean, this sounds like a good theory, but I could talk for a long time and tell you lots of things, and they may be true, a portion of them. But I think it's better if I try to show that to you here live. So, if I come down, I'm going to do a little bit of shopping. Just hold still where you are. Hello, how are you? It's lovely to see you. You did a wonderful job on stage. You have a lovely watch that doesn't come off very well. Do you have your ring as well? Good, just taking inventory. You're like a buffet. It's hard to tell where to start. There's so many great things. Hi, how are you? Good to see you. Hi, sir, could you stand up for me, please? Just right where you are. Oh, you're married. You follow the directions well. That's nice to meet you, sir. You don't have a whole lot inside your pockets. Anything down by the pocket over here? Hopefully so. Have a seat. There you go. You're doing well. Hi, sir. How are you? Good to see you, sir. You have a ring, a watch. Do you have a wallet on you? Well, we'll find one for you. Come on up this way, Joe. Give Joe a round of applause. Come on up, Joe. Let's play a game. Pardon me. Don't think that I need this clicker anymore. You can have that. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Come on up to the stage, Joe. Let's play a little game. Now, do you have anything in your front pockets? Money. All right, let's try that. Can you stand right over this way for me? turn around and let's see. If I give you something that belongs to me, this is just something, a half poker chip. Hold out your hand for me. Watch it kind of close. Now, this is a task for you to focus on. Now, you have your money in your front pocket here?
Yep.
Good. I'm not going to actually put my hand in your pocket. I'm not ready for that kind of commitment. One time a guy had a hole in his pocket, and that was rather traumatizing. I was looking for his wallet, and he gave me his phone number. It was a big miscommunication. So let's do this simply. Squeeze your hand. Squeeze it tight. Do you feel the poker chip in your hand?
I do.
Would you be surprised if I could take it out of your hand? Say yes?
Very.
Good. Open your hand. Thank you very much. I'll cheat if you give me a chance. Make it harder for me. Just use your hand. Grab my wrist, but squeeze. Squeeze firm. Did you see it go?
No.
No, it's not here. Open your hand. See, while we're focused on the hand, it's sitting on your shoulder right now. Go ahead and take it off. Now, let's try that again. Hold your hand out flat. Open it up all the way. Put your hand up a little bit higher, but watch it close there, Joe. See, if I did it slowly, it'd be back on your shoulder. Joe, we're going to keep doing this till you catch it. You're going to get it eventually. I have faith in you. Squeeze firm. Squeeze. You're human. You're not slow. It's back on your shoulder. You were focused on your hand. That's why you were distracted. While you were watching this, I couldn't quite get your watch off. It was difficult. Yet you had something inside your front pocket. Do you remember what it was?
Money?
Check your pocket. See if it's still there. Is it still there? Oh, that's where it was. Go ahead and put it away. We're just shopping. This trick's more about the timing, really. I'm going to try to push it inside your hand. Put your other hand on top for me, would you? It's amazingly obvious now, isn't it? It looks a lot like the watch I was wearing, doesn't it?
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Oh, thanks. But it's only a start. Let's try it again a little bit differently. Hold your hands together. Put your other hand on top. Now, if you're watching this little token, this obviously has become a little target. It's like a red herring. If we watch this kind of close, it looks like it goes away. It's not back on your shoulder. It falls out of the air, lands right back in the hand. Did you see it go? It's funny. You got a little guy, he's union. He works up there all day. If I did it slowly, if it goes straight away, it lands down by your pocket. I believe, is it in this pocket, sir? No, don't reach in your pocket. That's a different show. Sorry, that's rather strange. They have shots for that. Here, can I show him what that is? That's rather bizarre. Is this yours, sir? I have no idea how that works. We'll just send that over there. That's great. I need help with this one. Step over this way for me. Now, don't run away. You had something down by your pants pocket. I was checking mine. I couldn't find everything, but I noticed you had something here. Feel the outside of your pocket for a moment. Down here, I noticed this. Is this something of yours, sir? Is this? I had no idea. That's a shrimp.
Yeah, saving it for later.
You've entertained all these people in a wonderful way, better than you know. So we'd love to give you this lovely watch as a gift. Hopefully it matches his taste. But also we have a couple of other things, a little bit of cash.
Yep.
And then we have a few other things. These all belong to you, along with a big round of applause from all your friends. Joe, thank you very much. So, same question I asked you before, but this time you don't have to close your eyes. What am I wearing? Attention is a powerful thing. Like I said, it shapes your reality. So I guess I'd like to pose that question to you. If you could control somebody's attention, what would you do with it? Thank you.
I can see you guys are a bit stunned. All right, so what we will talk about on next Wednesday. So I saw in the chat room, folks were asking, Monday is Labor Day, so we won't have class on Monday. So we'll start chapter 2 on Wednesday, and we'll get through that. But until then, are there any questions? Cody, your
No, sir.
expressions were priceless during that video. So.
Yeah, that video was surprising.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
TED Talks. It's hilarious. Like, no, I don't know. There's all kinds of stuff on there. That was so funny.
Yeah, and I've shared with you guys later on, not today, but there are experiences that I've had where people have tried to manipulate my thinking so that they could create a scenario where they would get more money out of me than originally been planned. And it's redirection. I'll talk about that later. But until then, guys, we are at our time for today. So thank you. Have a really incredible week, a great weekend. Enjoy Labor Day. And I will see you all on next Wednesday.
Take
We
care,
don't-
Professor. Thank you.
We don't have any
Thank
assignments yet.
you.
Look on the syllabus. It should identify when the assignment is due.
Okay, thank
Have a
you.
good day.
We have a great day.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor.
You're welcome. Take care. Joel, you all good?
This is recorded, right? I think I
It is.
got some. I think I might have missed a part here and there, but
Okay. And if you watch the video and you have questions, just email me and I'll answer them for you.
okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care.
Have a good long weekend.
Thank you. You too.
Hi, Professor. I have a
Hi,
question.
Fatima.
So, last week on Wednesday, I was actually having a hard time getting onto Zoom. So when you actually talked about the project, I want to say, or the story assignment, I didn't get like clear instructions on it.
Okay. Did you watch the video?
Yes, I did watch the video, but so I had like options, but I didn't know if they were acceptable. I was gonna email you actually today after class, but I was like, since we're on Zoom, let me just ask you.
Yeah.
I don't know, like I know that we have to like choose a story or whatever, but I don't get the part where it's like we have to do the scenario part about like where it has to relate with psychology.
Okay. Well, I mean, the premise is this. That as a child,
Mm-hmm.
now, and I used Red Riding Hood, but as a child, you know, there isn't this realization that a wolf can't eat people, and if a wolf does eat people, they can't come back to life.
Yeah.
But in the childhood story, that's the way it's presented, right? Red Riding Hood and Grandma gets eaten by the wolf. The woodsman comes and kills the wolf, cuts him open, and Grandma and Red Riding Hood jump out. So now, as an adult, if you were to look at that same story, you would say, well, wait a minute. How is it that you can convince children that that's real? And why, as adults, knowing the theories of psychology, we start to have the realization that those things can exist, right? So you're looking at the story, whichever story you choose, you're looking at that story and saying, well, here's how the story is presented, but according to psychology, here's why children might believe it versus adults. And here's some supporting factors why that can't be true or why this is true. And for instance, if we unveil it a little bit more, even again, talking about Red Riding Hood, the color spectrum, the color red is the most prolific color in the spectrum.
Yeah.
So why would Red Riding Hood, you know, so now it's talking about attention, the psychology of redirection or attention getting. Red is the most prolific color. So if she's wearing red, she's probably going to be more obvious to the wolf and everybody else than she would if she wore something else. So that's the idea. Now I did on Canvas under files, there should be something called sample doc.
Okay.
And so if you read that, you should also get a little bit more of an idea.
Okay, so will it make sense, or can I do Goldilocks and the Three Bears?
Say that again.
Can I do Goldilocks and the Three Bears?
Well, send that to me in an email because some people have already sent the stories that they want to write about. And remember that no more than 3 people can write about the same story.
Okay.
So if you'll send that to me, I will check the list. And if no one else or not more than 3 people have chosen that so far, I'll send you back an email saying, yeah, that's the one you
Okay,
can write about.
perfect. That makes totally sense now. Thank you
Okay.
so much.
You're really welcome.
Have
All
a
right,
good one.
Thank you. Enjoy your week.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.